Welcome to Geopolitics Demystified. This is our very first interview of the podcast series, and we are extremely pleased and honored to have a remarkable guest, Scott Ritter. There are only a handful of people like him in the US and the West who know geopolitics and speak the truth. The second part is very hard because of censorship, and Scott knows the risk, as he has been banned from the US social media multiple times over the last 2 years. But he never backs down. As a veteran of the US military and the Marines, Scott led the UN weapons inspection program in Iraq. Before that, he worked on the arms control program regarding the Soviet Union. Needless to say, Scott has a vast understanding of geopolitics, military, wars, and intelligence. He has written numerous books and articles on geopolitics. More importantly, he's a true patriotic American who speaks out against misguided foreign policies and illegal wars. In a world of propaganda, Scott speaks with facts and wisdom, which we need more than ever as we stand on the brink of a world war. Scott, welcome to Geopolitics Demystified.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So we would like to focus on two issues: war in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine. So more specifically, what, why, and how. What is going on? Why are these wars happening, and what will happen at the end? So let's break it down. Scott, my first question is, are we on the brink of a world war? And it's not just sensationalism, because if we look at the Ukraine war and the war in the Middle East, we have about 40 to 50 nations that are actually involved in these wars in some form of, or another. And these include the nuclear powers as well. So what are the best case scenarios and the worst case scenarios with these two wars?
Well, the current conflict involving Israel and Iran has, on the surface, all the makings of a potential regional conflict that can transform into a global conflict. Very dangerous situation, especially given the fact that one of these nations, Israel, has a declared nuclear weapons program that it has made known indirectly would be used if Israel ever faced a situation where its existential survival was on the line. And so we shouldn't be dismissive of the risks that are here. But this conflict is also thoroughly imbued with people who don't want it to expand into a broader regional and global conflict. And of import is that leading this list is Iran. It's not in Iran's interest to have this conflict spin out of control. The United States, likewise, does not want this conflict to spin out of control. And the United States has the ability to leverage its influence on Israel in a way that influences Israeli policy making. Just this morning, there's word coming out from reliable sources that the United States has reached out to Iran to see if Iran might be willing to turn the other cheek, so to speak, to give Israel a face-saving way out of its current predicament by allowing Israel to launch a symbolic strike that would allow Israel to say that it has reestablished, a deterrence model of some credibility, meaning that they are putting the Iranians on notice never again to attack us the way you attacked us the other night. Iran has said that it won't tolerate any such thing. that if Israeli aircraft take off, Iran will fire its missiles. It'll be punishment that's tenfold over what was delivered on April 13th and 14th. But you have to ask yourself, what is Iran's objective here? Iran was not the party seeking broader conflict. That conflict was thrust upon Iran by Israel's precipitous and dangerous strike attack against the Iranian consulate in Damascus. And Iran had no choice after that point but to establish a deterrence model that put Israel on notice that this kind of action will not be tolerated, that Iran would strike back. Israel, I believe, operated under a false premise that Iran was afraid to retaliate because Israel had in the past carried out so many strikes in Iran using proxies, the assassination of nuclear scientists, the destruction of critical infrastructure outside of Iran, direct military action by Israel against Iranian personnel and equipment and facilities in Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. I think Israel believed that Iran wouldn't retaliate over the consular strike, at least not in a way that aggressively breathed life into an active deterrence policy. But Israel was wrong. They miscalculated, and Iran struck back. But Iran struck back in a very measured way, in a way that provided a demonstration of capability without actually doing massive harm to Israel.
So I have one follow-up question on that. So when we look at Netanyahu, so he has been obsessed with Iran for like the last 30 years or so, They wrote this white paper called The Clean Break in the 1990s, where they fantasized about destroying the Iranian regime, as they call it. And then also, right after 9/11, there was the famous Pentagon memo that Wesley Clark talked about. And he also said that the Neocons in the U.S., who worked very closely with Netanyahu, they said that they want to take out 7 countries in 5 years. So, but the trick that Netanyahu and his team, and his party, they played, so is this the opportunity that Netanyahu has been waiting for decades?
Well, there's no doubt that not just Benjamin Netanyahu, but his right-wing coalition partners, the extreme right of Israel, of the Israeli political body that's been empowered by his electoral victory. They're now part of a coalition government that speaks of a number of things: denying statehood to the Palestinians, an expansive model of what Israel should look like, and the need to destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure. This is something that Netanyahu has been pushing for some time now. But the problem for Netanyahu is that Israel lacks the capacity to project meaningful military power against Iran on a sustainable basis without American assistance. Over the course of the past 2 years, Israel has conducted major exercises together with the United States designed as stress tests, so to speak, where they simulate what would happen if all of Israel's enemies at one time attacked Israel. What would Israel do? How would Israel respond? And on both occasions, Israel lost. They couldn't defeat Hezbollah. They couldn't defeat Iran. They couldn't defeat Syria, even with American assistance. And I should also point out that in both scenarios, the war gamers who built the model never envisioned Hamas attacking Israel in a major way. They always felt that Gaza and the West Bank could be pacified with a heavy military presence, that at worst there'd be some minor terrorist actions, but they never envisioned a major war with Hamas simultaneous that would absorb so many of Israel's military resources. So Israel's very weak today. They aren't in a position to attack and defeat Iran on their own. They would need American assistance, much more American assistance than America has historically been willing to provide. But America has been put on notice by Iran that Iran has established a certain deterrent superiority over America after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, when Iran launched missiles against the Al-Assad air base that demonstrated Iran's military lethality, that Iran can use missiles to destroy American military facilities in the region anytime they want to, and there's nothing America can do to stop this. Moreover, Iran has the ability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran has the ability to strike the oil production infrastructure of neighboring nations like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, etc. The combination of these would create an energy security crisis globally and bring down many of the world's economies, including the United States. Just to remind your audience that President Biden, in order to appease a domestic political audience last year to generate lower gas prices, started releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and America is down to less than 17 days of reserve. This is a precarious situation given the potential of Iran to shut off global energy supplies. And so the United States is looking at this situation, and they're telling Iran, or telling Israel, we'll defend you, but we won't participate in any offensive military action. And this ties Israel's hands because there's very little Israel can do militarily that will have a meaningful impact. All it will do is open the door for more Iranian retaliation, which Iran has already demonstrated Israel cannot defend against, not effectively. And so, I know Netanyahu has articulated a desire to strike, but the fact of the matter is he knows that he can't without triggering a broader war. Now you have to ask yourself, if you're Iranians, it looks like you have Israel between a rock and a hard place. Wouldn't you double down on this? Why would you do anything to make life easier for Israel? But Iran's strategic objective was not, at this juncture, to go after Israel. They have achieved a certain regional dominance over Israel through the axis of resistance, and they have empowered Hamas to prevail over Israel in its stated objectives in Gaza, so that Israel is suffering a defeat there. There's no need for Iran to pile on, especially when Iran is looking strategically at pivoting to the east. Iran is looking at furthering relations with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran has joined the BRICS Plus Forum. They're looking forward to the meeting, the summit meeting in Kazan, Russia in October, where this forum will be discussing, how to transition the world from an American singularity to a global multipolarity, and Iran wants to be part of that multipolar world. They have promised their people, the Iranian people, the Iranian government's promised the Iranian people prosperity after decades of sanctions. Here, finally, Iran is positioned to deliver on that promise, to engage in the kind of economic growth that generates the prosperity for the Iranian people. Why throw that away in a war with Israel that doesn't need to be fought? And so, we're at an interesting situation to see what Iran does. And if I were a betting man, I would bet that Iran finds a compromise solution that offers a safety valve for Israel, so that Israel can do something that's face-saving. It has no meaningful impact on Iran. Everybody understands that Iran will not tolerate a strike against Israel. The fact is, the Israeli search for a face-saving mechanism proves Iran's point, that if you attack Iran, we will destroy you. Israel knows this, but Israel needs a face-saving mechanism out of this. And I think it's in Iran's best interest to give Israel this face-saving mechanism, to allow Israel to bomb an empty Iranian facility outside of Iran and say, look, we retaliated against this, and then they'll call it a day. The event will be shut. I don't think anybody's looking for regional conflict or regional war, not even Netanyahu at this point, because he has no prospect of surviving such a conflict politically.
So one follow-up question. So, so let's say, that Israel has an opportunity to save face by bombing some place in Iran where nobody gets hurt. But the primary problems have not gone away, right? So what are we going to do with the people in Gaza? And what is Israel going to do with, the Hezbollah in Lebanon? And what about the Houthis? So those problems have not gone away.
Yeah, and there's nothing Israel can do about it. There's nothing the United States can do about it. The United States has gone to war against the Houthi, and we can't stop the Houthi from shutting down the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, from interdicting shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. American deterrence models no longer work. Israel cannot afford to go to war with Hezbollah. What the Iranian attack on Israel proved is that Hezbollah is in possession of missiles that can defeat the Israeli missile defense shield. That the attack that Iran did on Israel that exposed the weaknesses of the Israeli missile defense shield can be conducted by Hezbollah many times over. And so Israel knows that it can't win a war against Hezbollah. They know that they've lost the war against Hamas. What needs to happen now is that the United States has to wean Israel off of the Netanyahu narcotic. It's time for Netanyahu to go. He's finished as a viable political leader. Israel's future cannot hinge on this madman. And I think Netanyahu will seek to take credit for deterring Iran, and then they're going to find a off-ramp to get Netanyahu out of the way so that Israel will have to deal with the fact. Look, it's not a fact that Iran is declaring victory or Hamas is declaring victory or anybody's declaring. Israel's acknowledged defeat. Haaretz newspaper, the day before the Iranian attack, ran a front page story that said, "We've lost against Hamas. We haven't accomplished any of our objectives." This is a mainstream Israeli newspaper that has good sources. And they say the Israeli government acknowledges they have lost everything against Hamas. Everything. They haven't defeated them militarily. They haven't defeated them politically. Hamas will get a ceasefire. They haven't released the hostages. On and on and on and on. It's a defeat. So the question now is, how does Israel mitigate the consequences of this defeat? And the first step is to empower political leaders that are able to politically survive the acknowledgement of defeat. Netanyahu can't. He's the man who was in charge during October 7th. He embarrassed Israel with the inability to defend Israel. He's now the man who was in charge during the Iranian attack. He's the man who lost the war against Hamas. He's not the person that you need right now to create confidence in Israel from a security standpoint. They need to bring someone in who can acknowledge the defeat of Netanyahu and yet try and get Israel to emerge politically intact in a newly defined neighborhood. Israel's going to have to learn to live with Hamas peacefully. Israel will have to learn how to live with a Palestinian state. These are things that a Likud government, a coalition government under Netanyahu could never imagine. Israel will have to redefine how it operates, or else Israel will cease to exist. And that's the other reality that's out there. For the first time, Israel is confronted with the reality that there are many nations of the world who would be very happy if Israel went away, if Israel disappeared. Israel's never had to deal with this before. Israel always had the moral authority, the moral high ground. They played the Holocaust card. They played the victim card. They had the world rallying around them. Today, the only person standing next to them is the United States. And the United States is also saying, we're sort of tired of what you're doing. So Israel feels abandoned. They're going to have to redefine themselves, but they can't do that with Benjamin Netanyahu at the helm.
Wow. So you think there's going to be a ceasefire?
There has to be a ceasefire. Israel can't continue this war. The more Israel attacks the Palestinians, the more isolated Israel gets. The fact of the matter is, Israel's economy is in a shambles right now. And primarily because of the de facto blockade that's been instigated by the Houthi. The Iranians understand that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have been playing a game allowing Israeli cargo ships that otherwise would have transited the Suez Canal to offload at Saudi and Kuwaiti ports and bring their goods into Israel, creating a lifeline. Iran just boarded and took over one of these cargo ships, saying this approach is not available to you anymore either. So Israel's in big trouble. People are starting to flee Israel. That's one of the key indicators of the demise of Israel, is when 4 million dual passport holders decide that it's better to live in the nation of their other passport than it is to live in Israel. And Israelis are starting to flee. Israel is no longer seen as the land of milk and honey. It's seen as a death trap. And people are starting to flee. The moment you start getting a critical mass of people fleeing Israel, that's it. That's the end of Israel. It can't survive. And this is happening right now. Israel, even if they pretend to be strong militarily, the people living in Israel cannot survive economically. And so they will have no choice but to leave. Israel has to turn this around. They have to find a way to turn this around. And you can't turn it around by continuing to alienate the world against you by carrying out genocidal policies in Palestine.
Yeah, so it's so fascinating, because if you look at the people on social media, the regular people, so they have were turned against Israel. And I've never seen such a massive shift in the public opinion against Israel. But if you look at the elite, the politicians in the West, they are still 100% pro-Israel, As all these senators and the congressmen, they, show up on Facebook and Twitter, and they say that I stand with Israel. And there's not a single, the mainstream media or politicians who have the guts to speak out against Israel. So nobody is talking about ceasefire. So maybe one or two politicians, like in, I think Spain, and Ireland. So maybe a few countries like that. They are talking about the two-state solution. But if we look at the establishment, they seem very, very pro-Israel, and they seem to be willing to fund, to defend, to send weapons and arms. So is that just a public posture, or will they also shift and change their narratives in the near future?
First of all, using America as a source of data regarding Israel is misleading, because of the inherent bias that's built into America by the fact that Israeli interests have bought the U.S. Congress through the AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. They openly brag about having bought Congress. They have ads today on how they can use their money to win a pro-Israeli Congress. This is the interference in American domestic politics that is frankly speaking illegal, but we give Israel a pass on this. So you have politicians who have taken Israeli money, and so they're going to perform. They've been paid for a service, so they will deliver the service. But the fact of the matter is, the United States as a government, as an entity, we're in a different situation, because we're looking at a world in transition. We're looking at a world that's moving away from a rules-based international order where the American singularity, American hegemony is sustained, to a multipolar world that's defined by the law-based order, international law, the United Nations Charter, etc. And we recognize the inevitability of this transition. Even Joe Biden has said that this is happening. We can't stop it. We have to learn how to control it, to contain the consequences of this, to mitigate against this, to make sure that when this transition takes place, America is best positioned to continue its leadership role. But you can't call yourself a leader if nobody wants to follow you. And because of what's happening vis-a-vis Israel, American ambassadors around the world are sending messages back to the State Department, that we have lost the global South, that we no longer have moral authority in the global South, and it's because of Israel. And so at some junction, it doesn't matter that Tom Cotton, a senator from Arkansas who has stuffed his pockets with Israeli money, that Christine Gillibrand, a senator from New York, has done the same thing. I could go down and down on the lists of all the people who have taken Israeli money. It doesn't matter that they stand up in front of a camera and spout the propaganda that Israel's told them to recite. That's irrelevant. What's relevant are the decision makers inside Washington, D.C., who come together in the National Security Council to talk about, the state of affairs and where we stand, and understanding that America is about to be left behind, to be isolated. And it's a self-isolating policy, that our policy supporting Israel is costing us strategically. And at some point in time, the price of continuing to support Israel blindly becomes too much. It means that the destruction of America, the demise of America. And as close as we are to Israel, we're never going to sacrifice America for Israel, ever. And we're at that juncture now where politicians have recognized this. When you have people like Condoleezza Rice and Richard Haass, who historically have been very, pro-Israeli hawks, now talking about the absolute necessity of sanctioning Israel over what they're doing against the Palestinians, that for Israel, that means that they've lost. They've lost America. And that's the fact. AIPAC doesn't have the control that it once had. Yes, it has some paid resources who will say what they want to say, but AIPAC's ability to shape American policy is failing. It has failed and will continue to fail as long as Israel carries out this genocidal policy against the Palestinian people and against the civilians in Gaza.
So follow up to that is, I believe what you're saying about the multipolar world and the inevitability. But then I look at the Arab states, and so most of the richest ones are so quiet, and some of them are even pro-Israel. So I see like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, with Turkey, and so their response to the genocide in Gaza has been very subdued. They don't even impose sanctions on Israel. They don't even go to the ICJ, and that job was left up to South Africa. So that seems to be surprising, because if they see the shift in the global power and the changing world order, then this would have been a perfect opportunity for them to take, to stand with Palestinians and to do something tangible against Israel. But they all have been so quiet and so meek. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, they've never stood with the Palestinian people. Let's just be straight up honest about the Arab world, with very few exceptions, and you can count them on one hand, probably with one finger, two fingers. No Arab nation has ever stood with the Palestinian people. Nobody's a friend of the Palestinian people. Yemen, yes. The Houthis, yes, they are, demonstrably so. In Lebanon, the supporters of Hezbollah are friends of the Palestinian people, with a caveat, because they, of course, are Shia and the Palestinians are Sunni. So there's always going to be a little bit of animosity there, the Sunni-Shia split. But my point is, if you're waiting for nations that have historically been against Palestine to rise up and defend Palestine, when there's so much pressure put on them by the United States to maintain the course, that it isn't just about their relationship with Israel, it's their relationship with the United States. And how many of these Arab nations have the courage to divorce America at this juncture? None. None have the courage. And so America continues to hold sway over the political and economic elite. The problem comes in the street, the Arab street. Here you see the Arab people do support not just the Palestinian cause, but because of their co-religionists. There's a reason why October 7th was called Al-Aqsa Flood, because of the threat posed by Israel to the third holiest place in Islam, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Even if you don't support the Palestinians, if you're Muslim, you must support the defense of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And once you start supporting the defense of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Palestinian cause gets woven in there because they are one and the same. And so you're seeing a ground-up pressure being put on governments. I'll give you an example. In Turkey, it's not an Arab government, but it's a democracy. Erdogan won re-election for president last year, and his party, the AKP, won majority of seats in the parliament. So it would look like he's firmly in control. But just last month, they had the local elections. And for the first time since Erdogan's AKP party took over, the AKP did not get the majority of the vote. That went to the CHP, the secular party. They got 36%. The AKP got 35%. Moreover, the AKP lost additional seats in parliament, or not in parliament. They lost additional control over governors and mayorships when parties that had aligned themselves last year broke away. Why did these parties break away? A lot of them broke away because of criticism of Erdogan's soft approach towards Israel. Turkey is a Muslim nation, and the Muslim people of Turkey are deeply affronted by what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people. And it manifests itself politically to the extent that Erdogan had to take a moment of self-criticism and say, I hear you. And he immediately puts 56 sanctions in place against Israel, becoming the first nation to actually sanction Israel because of what they're doing to Gaza. So, Turkey's in a very difficult situation, but because of the Turkish street, which had its voice magnified by local elections, Erdogan had to take action. Now, none of these Arab nations in the region are democracies. So it's difficult to see, this kind of transition take place using the kind of democratic model that we're used to in the West. But many of them are tribal. And many of these tribes, in some ways, the traditional Arab cultural tribalism is more democratic and more representative, because at the end of the day, a tribal leader has to sit before his people and listen to the people. And you're seeing in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, more and more the people at the lowest levels are letting their leaders know they are unhappy. And those leaders then work their way up the command. And the thing about not being a democracy is you continue to govern only by the consent of the people. That once the people lose confidence in your ability to govern, they will remove you from power. They don't do it democratically. They do it by running into your palace, putting a rope around your neck and dragging you out and hanging you by the neck until dead, dragging your body behind a car. Look at the fate of the Hashemite king in Iraq in the 1950s. Look at the potential fate of King Jordan if he continues to alienate the majority Palestinian population in Jordan. There's not an Arab leader that's sleeping easy tonight because of what's happening, because they understand that below them, the people are seething, the people are angry. And so this will provide a balance. The Iranian attack, normally, the United States has spent the last several decades trying to create a Sunni shield against the Shia presence of the axis of resistance. So normally you'd be hard pressed to find Arab, Sunni Arab nations that would be willing to align themselves with Iran. The only condition, the only situation that could possibly happen is if Iran was fighting Israel, the arch enemy. But the United States has been spending the last decade conditioning the Arab world to peacefully coexist with Israel, to normalize relations with Israel. And so the leadership had been working on that notion with the people. Because believe me, no matter what the king of Saudi Arabia wants, if he normalized relations with Israel and didn't have the approval of the people, he wouldn't be king very much longer, because there's a lot of animosity in the Arab world towards Israel. So a lot of preparatory work had been done to get the Arab street to be accepting of normalized relations with Israel. That's gone. So there's no more support in the street for the normalization of Israel. And now you're starting to see that, that's an important flip, but now you're starting to see pressure go up for the states to do more against Israel, which means going against the United States. And this is where the declining influence of the United States comes into play. Again, I don't know how many people out there, I can tell you, I followed the region very closely. And I'm going to acknowledge that I didn't predict China's ability to negotiate a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Wasn't on my bingo card. I didn't think it was even possible. I wasn't even considering it. And I pay close attention to this. I don't think there's too many people out there who can honestly say, yeah, I predicted that one. I think it took almost everybody by surprise. But it shows that there is a fracture in the control that America had over the Middle East. There was this contract that existed since Franklin Roosevelt met the King of Saudi Arabia near the end of the Second World War on a ship in the Red Sea, and they did the deal with the devil that America would guarantee security and Saudi Arabia would guarantee oil, supplies to oil. And that relationship became expanded. The Carter Doctrine of the 1970s, that America would intervene militarily to protect the oil production of the region, led to Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm in 1990, 1991, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, threatening the stability of energy security. But that day's over. We've disengaged from the Middle East. The Carter Doctrine is no longer in play. The United States doesn't have the ability to deploy military power in a meaningful fashion in the Middle East. And this is a new reality that is sinking in amongst the world. This is why Saudi Arabia is engaging with China. This is why other nations are engaging with Russia. This is why BRICS is so important, because it's providing a new center of gravity, a new geopolitical center of gravity that can replace American hegemony that the Middle East has been relying on for so long for for basically the framework of stability. That infrastructure, that framework is corroded and rusted and is collapsing. China and Russia are building a new framework, and there's a new way of thinking. And with that new way of thinking, you're going to see that the people, the Arab street, is going to have a greater voice, because the leadership had spent all its life focused on appeasing America, and now they're shifting. And as they shift, there's that moment of vulnerability where the population hasn't shifted with them, or they're not in concert with the population. And I think that's the place where we exist right now. So it's very difficult to sit there and say, because the Saudi royal family has done this, that's how Saudi Arabia goes. Nah, the Saudi royal family has to start looking down at the Saudi people, and the Saudi people are increasingly becoming alienated with what Israel is doing.
Wow. Okay. So that's a fascinating perspective, and I have not thought about it, and I haven't heard anybody else really say it like you did. So that's quite on, the hopeful side, what you're saying. So now, let's move to Ukraine for the next 5 minutes or so. So what is happening there? On one hand, it looks very clear that Ukraine has lost. They don't have weapons. They don't have the ammunition. They're struggling with funding, the morale. They don't even have enough men, so they're trying to send women to the battlefront. So what is happening? And then on the other hand, we hear the European countries saying, we're going to send French soldiers. We're going to send the Patriot missiles, the fighter jets, the F-16 or the F-15 fighter jets. So it's very contradictory, and it seems very suicidal. So what is happening there? Will Russia go for negotiation, or will they go all the way up to Odessa?
Well, in order to understand what's happening today, we have to understand, the starting point. When this conflict started in 2022, February 2022, Ukraine had since 2015, that's 7 years, been armed, trained, and organized to be a proxy of NATO. A very large standing army, very capable standing army, well-equipped, well-led, well-trained, with a viable integrated air defense system, etc. Russia made a move with insufficient forces, believing that they could intimidate Ukraine into accepting a peace deal that almost worked. The Istanbul communique that was negotiated between Russia and Ukraine was on the cusp of being approved before NATO intervened. Boris Johnson went to Kiev, talked them out of it. Now they're at war. Ukraine received, the new Lend-Lease deal, $45 billion worth of American aid that started flowing in during the summer of 2022. At that time, when the aid flowed in, Ukraine still had a viable air defense network that could prevent the Russians from fully interdicting this. It allowed Ukraine to receive weapons that Ukraine also had training taking place outside of Ukraine's borders. So the weapons came in with trained personnel, and they could be integrated in seamlessly into their existing military structure. Russia had not found a way to do continuous interdiction, etc. Russia was left to fight a war of attrition at the front line. Russia's been fighting that war of attrition, not just against ground units, but against this air defense network too. It's been a game, I call it, of Django blocks, where both sides have those Django blocks, and the ones where you remove until one tower collapses. But in this game, I get to go to the Ukrainians and pop out a Django block. They get to pop out one, but then I have a defense industry that's giving me Django blocks, so I have a whole supply of them over here. So they pop out one, I put one in, but they don't have it. I pop out another one. Then NATO gives them some supplies. They pop it back in. We're back. They pop. I pop. I pop. I pop. The idea is for me to be able to pop more blocks and they can replace, so their block comes down before mine comes down. Well, Russia's block has never been threatened to come down. What Russia has been able to achieve is outlast NATO's ability to resupply, so that Russia's popping blocks, and there's nothing coming in right now. And the other thing is, imagine this air defense shield. So if I went to pop a block, you hit my hand. So I tried, you hit my hand. I didn't get to do it. You survived that one. But now I've taken away the air defense shield. You've got nothing to hit by my hand, and I'm popping blocks where I want to. Pop, pop, pop. The collapse is inevitable. That's where we are right now. So even if because now we have a situation where if you don't have that air prediction shield, the next part of the rules is if you receive aid, as you try to plug it in, I get to hit your hand away. You see, if you have the air defense, you get to hit my hand away. If you don't have air defense, I get to hit your hand away. So even if Ukraine receives goods now, I'm hitting it away. It doesn't get plugged in. The proof is the French have sent troops along with Caesar artillery to Ukraine. Russia's blowing it up as soon as it arrives, killing the Caesar artillery piece and the crews with them, including the French advisors that came. You don't get to plug that block into the system. It gets slapped away. That's where we're at today. The Ukrainian Django block tower is going to fall. There's nothing that can be done to save it. Nothing can be done to save it. It's just a question of when it's going to fall. But it's not a question of if it's going to fall. And that's where we are today. There will be no negotiated end to this deal. The Russian ambassador to the United Nations made it as clear as day. He said that the West needs to accept the fact that the only way this ends is with the unconditional surrender of Ukraine. And that's the only way it will end. And it's going to end this year. Even British intelligence is saying it's over this year. So, they recognize
it. So what would Putin demand if there is the unconditional surrender?
Well, he's already...
the denazification. But in terms of the land, so what would Russia want in terms of the land?
I personally don't believe that the Russian government wants anything more than what it already has. Look, when Russia started this conflict, it wasn't looking for land. It was looking for security. Russia, of course, took Crimea in 2014 because the ultra-nationalists that took over in Maidan were seeking to impose their will on a Russian majority population in Crimea, and Russia said that will never happen. So they moved in and they brought Crimea on board. In the Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk, what Russia said is there has to be a referendum, that the will of the people must be considered, that they can't be subjected to cultural and ethnic genocide cleansing that was taking place, that they have to be protected. That'll be done through a referendum. But Kherson and Zaporizhia, these two oblasts, these two districts, Russia didn't want. And indeed, the Istanbul communique gave them back to Ukraine, along with all the other territories that Russia occupied. Russia wasn't looking for land. They were looking for results. Russia has insisted on denazification. This will be extremely harsh. I don't think people understand that it means far more than just getting rid of Zelensky and his cohorts. It means purging Western Ukraine once and for all of the ideology of Stepan Bandera. This ultra-nationalist ideology will be purged. It will not be tolerated. It will not be permitted. And it's going to be harsh. You either flee for your lives or you lose your lives. There's no middle ground. Russia's not going to allow a repeat of the Khrushchev era, where Banderas were released from the Gulag, welcomed back into Ukrainian society, and were allowed to winnow themselves in and take over Ukrainian society to create what happened today. That will never be allowed again. Banderism will be annihilated in Ukraine. And then the other thing is demilitarization. This entire Ukrainian military, this NATO proxy will be eliminated, gone, finished. That's what Russia will achieve. They're not looking at this juncture for Odessa or Kharkov or Dnipropetrovsk or Mykolaiv. What they are looking for is that Ukraine will never join NATO and Ukraine will never join the EU. Now, if Ukraine wants to play hardball and all this, I believe there is a scenario where Russia takes Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Kharkov, incorporates that into Russia, links up with the Transnistria region, creates that land bridge, and then leaves this pathetic rump state with no access to the sea to rot in hell. That's one option that could go forward. But I think the option that Russia's looking for is the option that says Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Kharkov are part of Ukraine, but that this new Ukraine will join a union, a political and economic union, together with Belarus. And there will never be EU membership, never be NATO membership that will be in perpetuity linked to Russia economically and politically. And that appears to be the direction that Russia is going. That's the Russian demands will be on the table for unconditional surrender. And if the Ukrainians insist on resisting, they're doing this the hard way, then Russia will take these territories and ensure that whatever survives, that is Ukraine, has no economic viability, will be a permanent cancer to the European Union, and it will lead a pathetic life and eventually have to come crawling to Russia. So I think the Russians would prefer the first model of economic and political union, but if that's unattainable because the West and Ukraine refuses to go that route, then Russia will simply take these territories and leave a decrepit state to rot. Afterwards, it still will not be allowed to join NATO or join the European Union. Russia will still control it, but Russia's not going to be there for their benefit. And that's part of the denazification process. There will be no benefits accrued for continuing to embrace Ukrainian nationalism.
Okay. So one last question. So if what you're saying is true, then the globalists and the big warmongers, they're going to lose in Ukraine. So they won't be able to defeat Russia to do a regime change as they have planned, since the Brzezinski days in the 1990s. They have, fantasized about Ukraine joining the NATO. So that big objective will be a failure. So Russia will come out stronger. And then there are they're also going to lose the Middle East in the sense that they're not going to able to defeat the Hezbollah. They're not able to defeat Iran, and the Israeli government has to, basically agree to a ceasefire and probably a Palestinian statehood. So these are all really, really bad news for the powers that be. So where do you think the world will be, like, say, by 2030?
I think both the European Union and NATO are institutions that will not survive in perpetuity, and indeed will probably collapse sooner rather than later. NATO is an empty shell. To repair NATO is prohibitively expensive, and nations today are talking about. To give you an example, Germany's talking about creating a armored brigade in Lithuania to bolster NATO defenses. First of all, a brigade doesn't change the balance of power in any meaningful fashion. Second of all, it's not known whether or not Germany can even pull this off. It's a very expensive proposition for Germany. One brigade. Their defense industry is collapsing. Their largest steel producers reducing the amount of steel produced every year by 20% because of the costs. And Germany's not alone. All of Europe's facing this problem. So NATO will not be able to rearm. That's one of the realities. And most nations will start to reflect on the fact that NATO, in this time of economic hardship, is an undesirable organization. It's an organization that doesn't lend itself to European strength, and the Europeans are going to start to realize that they have to come up with their own independent notion of what European security is outside of the framework of an American-dominated NATO. So I think we're going to see fractures develop in NATO, especially after the humiliation of their defeat in Ukraine, and people will start to realize that the United States isn't serious about backing things up. I mean, we promised Ukraine that we would be there, as long as it takes. But apparently, as long as it takes is a very short period of time because we're going to run away. And that reality is hitting many people in NATO that realize America is not a reliable ally over time, and that they have to rely on themselves, and that by themselves they can't confront Russia, so they're going to have to learn to peacefully coexist with Russia. It's part of a new European security framework, which is something Russia's been pursuing all along. So I think that's the case. I think NATO will collapse on its own volition over time, definitely between now and 2030. I think that's a distinct possibility. The European Union is also in crisis. The economic consequences of sanctioning Russia are starting to hit home in a real way, and you're starting to see deepening fractures in terms of competing notions of where the EU should go. We saw this even before the sanctions. If you recall the stress test that Europe was subjected to with Greece, the Greek crisis. Are we going to allow Greece to withdraw from the European Union, or allow Greece to collapse? What are the consequences? You saw two schools of thought evolve. You had a very conservative, tight-fisted approach out of Berlin. The Germans, the strongest economy in Europe, the economy that held up the European Union in the single currency. And then France, the number two economy, was talking about a more liberal spending, to freer access to money, etc. And, so you start to see a divide between Berlin and France on fundamental issues of how the European Union should operate in order to be viable over the long term. There still is no agreement. And now we're seeing additional stresses placed on the European Union. I don't see the European Union has always been linked with NATO. The expansion of NATO was part and parcel of a grand European Union plan. But now they're both in crisis mode, and I don't believe either will survive. I think you're going to see more exits from the European Union as time goes on. And then what happens in terms of a geopolitical balance as Germany diminishes as an economic power. I mean, Germany has already diminished as a military power. It's a joke. It can't even deploy a brigade to Lithuania without taking 3 years, and even then it's not known if they could do it. France is likewise becoming a joke. The powerful French army has been kicked out of Africa, and they can't deploy with certainty a brigade to Romania to intervene in Ukraine. And the survivability of that brigade is on question. So there's no military power to hold Europe together. Economically, look, I'll just say this. Porsche is leaving Germany because it can't afford to stay in Germany and produce Porsche, a signature automobile. Michelin tires in France is shutting down because they can't afford to continue to produce tires in France. Industry is fleeing Europe. The deindustrialization of Europe is taking place. And this will have a detrimental impact on Europe's ability to sustain. I mean, because the European Union was always this promise of collective co-prosperity. And now that nations are collapsing within, you're going to see that France and Germany are going to get tired of underwriting the European South, the developing South, Southern Italy, Portugal, Greece. They're not going to be able to sustain the underwriting of these economies. And if these nations then collapse and fall away, so too will the nations of the former Soviet bloc, the Eastern European nations will fall away, and the European Union will collapse. So I don't have much confidence in Europe's survival as a union that they've done. That Europe's going to have to redefine how it wants to, act in concert, both economically and militarily.
So when the future looks so bleak, and then you will look at Biden, he got together with the Japanese leader and the Philippines leader a few days ago to have this grand strategy, the trilateral summit to start a war with China in a few years. So these people are so delusional. It's just so shocking that, they still act like, okay, all right. So we've done a great job in Ukraine. We've done a great job in the Middle East. And now what we deserve is a war against China.
Well, Kushida, the Japanese prime minister is on his way out. He has zero popularity in Japan. He's not going to survive much longer. So whatever deal is brokered between Biden and the current prime minister is a deal that won't last. The Philippines, my understanding is they told the United States that there will be no more expansion of American military presence in the Philippines, and but that they're not looking for a war with China. The problem with the United States right now is that nobody believes that we're as strong as we claim to be. Janet Yellen just came out of China after meeting with the Chinese about, the economic relationship. And what she said was rather pathetic. She blamed the Chinese for being better capitalists than we were. She basically said, your economy's too big, too efficient, you control too much, it's unfair. Well, it's unfair because America's incompetent, China's competent. And that's not a very good argument now to take. You're supposed to lead from a position of strength. So imagine now the United States going to the ASEAN nations and saying, China's out competing us. China's beating us. And I know that you guys are dependent upon the Chinese economy, but we want you to leave the Chinese economic sphere of influence and join us, this weak nation that has no economic clout. And we want you to help empower us to be competitive with China. It might cost you a lot, but we need your help. And they're going to go, no, we're happy where we're at. We're going to find a way to peacefully coexist with the Chinese because they have a meaningful impact on us. You don't anymore. This is the problem America faces around the world. We've lost the clout we once had, the economic dominance, the military dominance, and the political dominance that comes from those two. How can we flex political muscles when we don't have the economy or the military to back it up? We're like a bodybuilder who looked good in the 1970s, but has been eating donuts and not going to the gym ever since. And, today he's an old man, balding, fat, atrophied muscles, not very impressive on the beach anymore. And yet we're still trying to pick up girls. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you, Scott, for your insights on the consequential wars and geopolitical events of our times. We would love to have you back again. To our listeners, hope you enjoyed it. We'll be having such fascinating interviews with thought leaders once a week. This is in addition to another podcast where I will be sharing my thoughts on a monologue format. Finally, we also have a Spaces event on X, formerly known as Twitter, every Friday, where you can join in and ask questions or share your views on geopolitics. So there's a lot of exciting content. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Geo7, etc. On Twitter X, you can find me at slcanthan2030. That's 2030. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Cheers.